Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. We are really excited to welcome you to the Florida Mathematics Redesign Update webinar. This is Carrie Henderson, and I serve as Executive Vice Chancellor of the Florida College System. Before we get started today, I wanted to cover a few of the webinar logistics. Participants are going to be on mute for the duration of the webinar. Material from today's webinar can be found in the Handouts tab. We have a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, as well as a copy of the Governor's recent executive order on the Florida standards. For those who are unable to participate, we will also be sending a recording of this email out after the fact, so you will have copies of all of the documentation. If you have questions throughout the process, go ahead and use the question pane to submit those questions. And then as we move into the last portion of the webinar for question and answer, we will also have the ability to unmute individuals who wish to ask a question. Our agenda for today's webinar starts off with a brief refresher on the work of the mathematics work groups. Many of you are familiar faces and have likely followed the work as it's taken place over the last several months. And we're excited to provide you with updates on the work that our work groups have done. Talk about what the next steps are with this work as we come to a conclusion and look to roll out the recommendations in summer. Identifying what the particular steps are and how you can be engaged is a critical component. We're also going to have time for question and answer and give you a brief overview on the Governor's executive order on the Florida standards. For those who may be new to the Student Success Center in this work, Florida Student Success Center identified math as a critical area of focus in the first year of the Student Success Center's existence. And so as we think about reducing barriers for students and putting them on pathways to careers, we know that math can serve as a barrier and does serve as a barrier for many community college students, not only in the Florida college system, but also across the nation. And for that reason, we identified math redesign as a focus area, and we charged 3 different work groups with identifying complex issues around math pathways in 3 areas. The first is high school transition into post-secondary. The second is Florida College System students and math sequences within one institution. And then the last work group is focusing on Florida College System students as they transition to our partners in the 4-year state universities. The deliverables are twofold. First, we are going to be cataloging evidence-based practices that are designed for scale. So we know that many of our participants within the work groups, many of your institutions are innovating and adopting practices around math redesign, math innovation. And so we want the opportunity to highlight those so that others who are looking to engage in this work can learn from you and learn from each other. And the second deliverable is what we're going to talk about today, and that's developing recommendations for state policy as well as institutional policy and practice around mathematics redesign. And so our intent over the last several months has been to focus on and focus our efforts toward those 3 deliverables. When the Student Success Center first engaged in this work, we knew that discussing mathematics and thinking about innovations and pathways, we could not limit it to just the Florida college system. Florida has an incredibly strong K-20 system, and as we think about our students transitioning from our secondary sector into our institutions and then again into the state universities. So we know that for work to happen at scale and students to be successful, we need to connect these 3 areas because they are so interconnected. And so we've invited participants from across K-12, the Florida College System, and the State University System to engage with us as members of these 3 work groups. We also identified members at large. So many of you are likely a member at large, and those who will engage and learn through newsletters and webinars, and you'll have the opportunity to submit feedback along the way. We designed this work around critical milestones that are culminating in the development of policy and practice recommendations. As we looked at this work and learned from other states, we were able to collaborate with the Dana Center out of the University of Texas at Austin They have a similar model for identifying the different steps related to guided pathways work. The first one that we looked at was defining what the challenges are. There's a lot of perceptions and a lot of opinions about the different challenges related to mathematics redesign, but what we wanted to know was, what do the data say, and how can we define this challenge so that we can better understand what the potential solution may be? So the first few milestones were focusing on defining what we thought the challenges were, prioritizing them, so understanding, are there certain things that we want to focus on more than others, gathering information. The one guiding principle throughout all of this work is to use evidence to inform the recommendations, and so that's been a huge part of the work that the work groups have engaged in. Then beginning to link challenges and solutions. We had a meeting at Polk State College in February where all of the work groups came together. We had almost 100 individuals focusing on identifying what the recommendations are going to be and then prioritizing those recommendations. So we've had a lot of work that has taken place between our kickoff in September and as recent as last week, having meetings with our work groups, and are really excited to be moving forward to share that milestone 6 that you see on the screen, which is policy and practice recommendations for scale. So you might ask yourself, what will these recommendations look like? And we wanted to allow the work group to really guide and inform what the recommendations looked into. And so we asked them for each of the challenges they identified to identify at least one recommendation that is a solution that could help address that challenge. And we will get into some specific examples later. So as we think about the template that we gave them, we asked them to identify what the recommendation is and clarify whether or not the recommendation is a policy or practice. We wanted them to know that, certainly policy at the local level, at the institutional level, can be really powerful and can help move the needle, if you will, on student success. But state policy is not off the table. We want to be able to be engaged with our policymakers as we think about best pathways for students in mathematics. And so as this work continues, certainly we will be striving towards statewide policy that can help inform and improve student success. We're also asking the work groups to consider the recommendations and who will be implementing them. Is this something that can happen locally, within a classroom or within a department at an institution? Or is this recommendation something that should be statewide, that everybody should be responsible for doing? We asked them to identify the particular strategies. So what is the solution? And then identify why does it need to be implemented. And this is where the data really come into play. And so the work groups throughout the last several months have requested a lot of data and information, not only within the Florida college system, but the K-12 and university system as well, and have also engaged with other states to identify potential ways that we could leverage their lessons learned for Florida specifically. And then the last piece is identifying the resources that are needed. It's really important as we think about actual implementation of recommendations to have a sense of the likelihood and the resources, both financial, human, technology, that are needed to actually implement the recommendations. And so the scope of this work has been identifying the recommendations and thinking through the resources, but certainly the implementation will come later on. So with the work groups, what we found in the process of making recommendations was that we wanted them to be, number one, bold and visionary. So we know that Florida is a national leader. Yesterday, many of you probably already know, 2 of our institutions were named as winners of the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence, both Miami-Dade College and Indian River State College. So we know that there's a lot of great work happening in Florida. So we want to continue that work and allow the work groups to come up with recommendations that are bold and visionary. But we also ask them to think about what is practical and what's achievable. One of our work group chairs has phrased it really well, which is, what is the low-hanging fruit? What is something that we could do with relatively limited resources that could have a change and could have an impact on students? And so that's been the way that we framed it, and what we found from the members of the work groups and the members of the different huddles was a lot of excitement about the ability to come up with these recommendations and work through the data, the information, all of the things that they would like to know as they move forward with recommendations. So where they are today is each of the work groups have identified a handful of recommendations, and I think there will likely be, because we have 3 work groups with almost 30 members apiece, probably several dozen recommendations. And so where they are today is to really prioritize what those recommendations are. We don't want necessarily a laundry list of these are all of the things that could happen. We will obviously be collecting that, but what we really want them to do is to think about what is really important that needs to happen first, and we can focus on that before we move on to the next step. So that's where they are in the process. And what I'd like to do is transition to tell you just a little bit about where they are and some examples that we've seen come out of the different work groups. I will caveat this by saying that these are certainly drafts, and so what you see here is likely to morph between now and June. But I wanted you to have an opportunity to see the different challenges that the work groups identified, keeping in mind that we had representatives from all 3 systems of public education in Florida. So there were individuals on the high school team who perhaps aren't as familiar with secondary education, and similarly members who were on the 2 post-secondary teams who perhaps didn't have as much information about administration and things of that nature. And so I think what we found through the process was that there's a lot of information sharing that could be done, because certainly we have a lot of really great things happening. And so what you see here as challenges might resonate with you at your institution and within your work, or you may find that perhaps this challenge doesn't resonate for you in your context. That being said, I'll give a few examples for each of the work groups. So the first one is focused on high school to post-secondary, so really understanding that transition from the K-12 system to the Florida college system. What we heard as we worked with this group is we shouldn't be focused just on high school. We know that in Florida, many students start algebra in middle school, and their impressions about mathematics is formed much earlier at the elementary level. And so a lot of our conversations have been outside the high school scope, which is certainly important, but starting to think about how can we embed excitement around math and embed and ensure that students have a growth mindset when it comes to math, so that an experience they have in 4th, 5th, 6th grade doesn't leave an impression that they don't like math. We heard a lot from this particular group about mindset and making sure that students were challenged and had the opportunity to learn more. And so the first challenge that was identified, and I think this is consistent across all 3 work groups, is that there's no recurring opportunities for communication and engagement to align content, so mathematics content, between high schools and colleges. What the work groups found was that these may exist at a local level through yearly meetings or through consortia agreements, but there isn't really a recurring structured opportunity for these really important discussions to happen. And so one of their suggestions will be to hold a statewide meeting that's focused on math, where all K-20 educators can come together around curriculum and vision across the education system. The second challenge that this group identified was that math requirements for teacher preparation programs differ from institutions to institutions. And so again, thinking about where Florida stands in terms of need for teachers, and also ensuring that the teachers have the professional development, the content knowledge to support students wherever they are. And so knowing that the Florida college system and the state university system play a huge role in teacher preparation, identifying the teacher prep program requirements between Florida college system institutions and state universities to see if there are opportunities for consistency in the math requirements as well as the depth of coverage. So that could be one potential solution to come out of this work. The last one that I'll share with this work group is that there is limited access to high quality math content and standards for teachers who need to refresh or review their topics. One of the big discussions we've had, many of your institutions may have started these discussions, is looking at a statistics pathway for students. So moving beyond just a traditional algebra pathway, but identifying students who may benefit from a stats course instead. And having these discussions with our K-12 partners, we've talked a lot about teacher preparation when it comes to teaching a statistics course. And we were given a few examples where teachers were asked to teach statistics courses, but it had been so long since they taught them that they really needed a boot camp and a refresher on how they can go about teaching that. And so to mitigate that, one potential solution would be to create a web-based repository on math content that teachers at the K-12 level can access so they can refresh and review their content that they must teach. So again, the idea of providing support for teachers and making sure that they have tools to be successful along the way. So now I'll talk a little bit about the work group that focused on Florida College System math sequences. And so within the Florida College System, there were the first challenge that I'll talk about today is limited resources in academic advising. So what's really important about this work and why we're so excited about it is while the topic of our discussions has been really focused on math at the post-secondary level and course content, a lot of the work and a lot of the discussion are things outside of the scope of what faculty members are doing necessarily on their day-to-day basis. And so looking back to some of the high school recommendations, you know, those are solutions that would need other folks to be involved in them to help with the implementation. And so with this particular group, academic advising became a critical discussion point. And the math faculty that we heard from really wanted a better understanding of what the resources are around advising, and do the advisors have information that they need to be successful. So we were able, through the Council of Student Affairs, to share with them a survey that we had recently done in the last year on advising across the system. And one of the work groups actually conducted a survey of advisors on their campuses and had discussions that perhaps hadn't happened before about, you know, what are some of the challenges that you face? Where do you see opportunities for more advising around putting students in a math pathway? So this group has talked about strengthening advising across institutions. They've thrown out the idea that there could be math faculty advising, and faculty could receive professional development and count that advising toward their service to the institution. They did note that that might be something to do informally, so not something that would be part of a contract or would be any issue, but the idea that faculty who want to help engage students in what math they need to take, depending on where they're going to go to their university, or if they're entering the workforce, what field they're going into, but having faculty be engaged in those discussions. There was a lot of interest in creating greater awareness for existing resources and existing opportunities. So the Common Prerequisite Manual was something that this group hadn't been familiar with, and thought that that might be a resource that could be shared. And then, of course, increased funds for more advisors. And I know that's something that is of critical importance to our institutions and was part of the Council of Presidents budget request for this year for the legislature. So more resources in advising is certainly something that this group has shared and has recommended to date. And then the next challenge I'll mention is that the content of Gateway Math courses may not necessarily be aligned to the needs of today's college students, in terms of both their fields of study, as well as where they want to go and what type of job they want to get. And so I mentioned briefly earlier, finding an alternative pathway to college algebra. What we found is many institutions offer liberal arts or a statistics pathway for students. So it's not that this isn't an offering that colleges have, but what we're hearing is that there may be a reluctance to put students on a liberal arts or a statistics pathway, because down the road, if a student changes their major and they actually needed college algebra, it could harm the student. And so that's a really important discussion that we're having at the statewide level, and we need to have across the system. And so what they've suggested, and they have worked with one of the university work groups on this, is a statewide survey that would look at different academic disciplines, so at the upper division level, to identify what are the actual skills, the mathematical skills that are needed, what are the topics that are relevant to students who are majoring in your program of study. And that would be information that we would gather from the upper division programs to get a sense of what is it that their graduates actually need to be successful. And then once we have that data and information, developing recommendations about those common math course requirements for each program. And so this is something that, certainly a discussion that we've had a lot and has been a critical focus area of these work groups. And as you might imagine, the Florida College System Math Sequences Work Group has had a lot of similarities to the Florida College System to University Work Group, and so there has been some cross-pollination of efforts there. I'll transition now to talk a little bit about the University Work Group and what they've done and what they're proposing. So one of the challenges that this group identified was that there are differences in content within courses between and within Florida College System institutions. So while we have a statewide course numbering system and while we have common learning outcomes, there are still a lot of differences within institutions and then between the Florida College System and the state university system. And so potential solutions for this challenge would be to encourage internal alignment within each institution, and that's something that we've heard a lot of times. Even within an institution, faculty members are teaching different content. This group is suggesting to potentially divide the Florida College System and the university system into regions, and then having curriculum alignment discussions among math faculty at a regional level. So not just looking at who are your feeder necessarily institutions, but also thinking about in your region, can we have these conversations? And then lastly, identifying key student learning outcomes that the students will have need to master and embed those student learning outcomes in exams, and including what those key student learning outcomes are in the course syllabi so that students at the beginning of a course and throughout a course know what to expect in terms of content. So that's one potential set of recommendations that could come out of this work group. And then the second one is that liberal arts course prerequisites, so MGS 1106 and 1107, and prerequisites for statistics, STA 2014 and 2023, are inconsistent among SUS institutions. That's something that we're hearing a lot, is that the course prerequisites are varying, which means that students who are transferring between institutions may not have a prerequisite that they need to enter into the gateway course, and that could lead to issues for excess credit hour accumulation. And so the idea of this potential solution is to develop a common set of prerequisites per pathway. So that was predicated on pathways being created, perhaps liberal arts pathway, statistics pathway, and college algebra, and then base it on the common course numbering system for the requirements within a pathway so that there is more consistency in the course prerequisites for students. And then also including a common course description throughout the process. So that's just a sample of the work that the work groups have done to date. As I said earlier, it could certainly change between now and our June Institute, but I wanted to get you a sense of the types of conversations that are happening. And what we are planning on doing is sharing the recommendations of the work group at our Mathematics Institute, which is scheduled for June 27th at the University of Florida Hilton Conference Center. So it's going to be in Gainesville, Florida. And we really hope that you will be able to participate with us. This is going to be an open event, and we want as many people there as we can for the work groups to be able to share their recommendations, but more so that we can start to have a dialogue about the recommendations in the context of what's happening at your institution. Do these recommendations make sense? Would you tweak them? Are there ways that we can leverage existing resources or learn from other states as we think about implementing some of these recommendations? So in terms of next steps, as I said, in June, we will have the Institute where the work groups will share their recommendations that are policy recommendations as well as practice recommendations around math pathways, math redesign. So that's really the culminating event where all of the work groups will have the opportunity to share their work. And what we want to do after that is have essentially an open period of time where individuals across the state can comment and weigh in and provide feedback on the recommendations. We know that the idea of this work touches more than just math faculty and touches certainly more than just the folks who have participated to date. And so we are going to essentially take the show on the road and share the findings and the recommendations with key stakeholder groups, such as the Council of Student and Instructional Affairs, the Articulation Coordinating Committee, the Higher Education Coordinating Council. So any stakeholder group who has an interest in math redesign at the secondary and post-secondary level, we want them not only to read the recommendations, but also have an opportunity to weigh in and provide feedback about what resonates and what makes sense in terms of their local context. So once we've had the opportunity for feedback and input to take place, our intent is that by the fall term, we would create a task force that will include representatives from the work groups, but would also include other individuals across the different education systems and different roles across campuses to prioritize the recommendations and then develop teams that are going to be assisting with implementation. We do anticipate some of the recommendations will be local, and so those would probably look a little different than what a state recommendation would look like. But the idea is that once we've had enough time and information and feedback, we would create an opportunity for individuals who participated in the work and individuals who have critical roles on campus, like advising, like testing, would be able to be involved in implementation. And so that's the plan for where we are in terms of next steps. Again, as I said earlier, we do recognize that state policy has limitations in terms of the time it can take to be part of a legislative process, but we do know that state policy provides an opportunity to affect change at scale. And so part of this work is to work toward that at a state level. And then part of the work is to help you at the local level identify what are the policies and practices that you can institute either in your classroom, at your college or university, and then within your community of the K-12 and university partners that you have. So that's the quick overview on the work of mathematics to date. And I'd like to transition a little bit before we open it up for question and answer to talk about an executive order that Governor DeSantis recently issued, which is very important and relevant to the conversation we're having around mathematics. And so Governor DeSantis issued Executive Order 1932, and it outlines a path for Florida to improve its education system and become #1 in the nation. And as you can see, it directs the Commissioner of Education and the Department of Education to do a number of things to help identify what that path is and to improve the education system, including eliminating Common Core from the Florida standards, providing a roadmap to make Florida standards #1 nationally, creating opportunities for public input. So understanding that it isn't just one group who should be weighing in on the standards, that there should be opportunities for experts in the field as well as parents to weigh in, improving the quality of instructional curriculum, identifying innovative ways to streamline testing. Civic literacy is an area of focus, and then literacy continues to be an area of interest with this executive order. So in terms of implementing the executive order, the Department of Education is currently in a standards review process that will be conducted throughout the year, and will have recommendations due to Governor DeSantis by January 1 of 2020. In terms of what the local institutions can expect, there aren't going to be changes to statewide assessments or school grades in 2018 and 2019, and 2019 and 2020 related to the executive order. And there are extensive public input opportunities before the recommendations are submitted, and then again throughout the rulemaking process that the state board will go through. So currently the standards review process is focused on grades 9 through 12 and math and ELA standards. We were very thrilled to be invited as an entity, the Florida Math Redesign Work Groups, to serve as one of the teaching experts in grades 9 to 12 mathematics standards. And so what that translates to is that we have 6 faculty members that represent the work groups who are going to be subject matter experts in the different topic areas under math. So looking at statistics as one, functions as one, algebra as one, and so on and so forth. So not only will we have a seat at the table from the post-secondary perspective and identifying what the standards should be for Florida, but we have representation of the work groups who can then go back to the larger collective, either at their institutions, their colleges, their universities, or within the math redesign work groups to weigh in on the different standards. So this is a really great opportunity, not only for folks such as yourself, as well as math faculty, to weigh in on what the standards might look like through the public comment process, but this also allows for additional input from members who are doing this work. So really excited to share that. And there will continue to be processes that allow for public input along the way. And I provided at the bottom a website so that you can find more information. And there are public testimonies able to be submitted now. So that period is open and they're collecting feedback. One of the handouts that you have on your question pane is the actual executive order, and then just a reminder that everybody has a copy of this presentation. Want to remind folks that FloridaCollegeSystem.com is a place that you can go to find information about the Student Success Center. Under Guided Pathways is our math redesign work, and so we've posted a lot of videos, a lot of newsletters, and some of the original research that has come throughout the process. So you're welcome to check us out there. And with that, I'm going to pause and open it up for questions. And so if you would, just go ahead and type a question that you have in the question pane, and I'll give folks a few minutes to do that. All right, one of the questions we got was, when can I find out more information about the Institute in June? And I will let you know that within the next day or so, we will be sending out a save the date. And soon we will be putting up a website that has information on accommodations, as well as an overview of the agenda, so you can have a sense of what to expect at that institute. And I'll pause to see if any more questions come in. Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and conclude our webinar. Thank you for your interest in this work. We are really excited to be able to showcase in June the work of these work groups, and more excited to begin to think about, especially in the fall term, how we can go about having conversations regarding implementation. So we will be sure to follow up with an email of the documents that we shared with you today, as well as a recording, and we hope to see you in June at our Institute.